a very warm welcome to another edition of World Panorama. Like always, get ready to catch up on the biggest international news of the week. I'm Sana Khan. Now, before we get to detailed reports, here's a look at the top stories this week. Indian Prime Minister meets Barack Obama in the first bilateral summit meeting after nearly 3 years. We take a look at what the talks achieved. Also at the United Nations, Manmohan Singh meets a Pakistani counterpart. Could this be the new beginning in the stalled peace deliberations? UN Security Council unanimously passes Syria chemical weapons resolution on dismantling the arsenal. Peace conference is scheduled for November. And the death toll is rising in the aftermath of the earthquake in Pakistan. At least 500 dead. Relief and rescue work is stepped up. Our top story this week is India at the UN General Assembly. Now, within hours of the White House meeting between Prime Minister Manmohan Singh and US President Barack Obama, the two countries released a joint statement that showcased the breadth of their cooperation as well as highlighted joint naval exercises, promised momentum on investment treaties, reaffirmed their commitment to specific energy sector projects and counter-terrorism strategies as well. Now, India and the US have reached the first commercial agreement on civilian nuclear power 5 years after that landmark deal between the two countries was clinched. Addressing a joint media interaction after talks with Manmohan Singh, Barack Obama disclosed that the two countries have sealed that agreement. Reiterating his commitment for strong ties, Obama said India is not just a regional but also a global power. In the wake of the twin terror attacks near Jammu, the Prime Minister is believed to have articulated India's concerns over terror emanating from Pakistani soil and the need for Islamabad to rein in elements responsible for the violence. Let's listen to what the leaders said.
We've made enormous progress on the issue of civilian nuclear power and in fact have been able to achieve just in the last few days an agreement on the first commercial agreement between a U.S. company and India on civilian nuclear power. We have a wide-ranging security cooperation in battling terrorism and something that Prime Minister Singh obviously is deeply concerned about given the impact of terrorism on India. We have enormous commercial ties between our two countries, and in fact bilateral trade between our two countries has gone up by 50% just over the last several years, indicating the degree of progress that has been made. India, as a significant, not just regional power, but world power, has worked closely with us on a whole range of issues from climate change to how we can help feed the world, alleviate poverty, and deal with disease.
I explained to President Obama the difficulties that we face given the fact that the epicenter of terror still remains focused in Pakistan. And I look forward to meeting with President Nawaz Sharif, even though the expectations have to be toned down given the terror arm which is still active in our subcontinent.
All right, to discuss more on this, joining me in the studio this week is Professor Savita Pande. She is a professor at the School of International Studies at the Jawaharlal Nehru University. Professor Pande, let me start by asking you, 5 years after, that landmark deal between the two countries was signed, here is a deal now on the paper. How significant is this, considering that this was Manmohan Singh's, sort of a very important point in his two terms, and considering that this is perhaps going to be his last meeting with Barack Obama before he steps down as Prime Minister?
Yeah, it is significant considering Indo-US deal made so much of noise, but it's also significant because the deal was held up for the liability clause, everybody had thought that it's almost dead. So coming from that, the reactor is going to come up in Gujarat. Let's hope it goes through, further without the hurdles. But it is, yes, in a way, actualization of the deal or the process that started during his term. it had implications with the United States, with other countries, which all had come to stand still following that. Let's hope it's a beginning.
Right, and in fact, it's in a very premature stage, right? Because the question of liability still does not arise now. Co-development and co-production, as was discussed between the two nations, as far as the defense, agreement is concerned, how significant is that?
Yes, I mean, as I said, that it still has to work out how far co-production will go in. It is significant. It is significant from also the aspect of the technology denial regimes, where not even knowledge can be transferred. From that stage to a stage when you had sanctions all through India's nuclear history, if you look at post 74, 1998, to a stage when you are almost going into a joint production. As I say, it is early, because if they accept all the issues together, but I would say very, very significant.
Right, because also US does see India as a counterbalancing force in Asia, if you look at China perhaps. So do we see the number of perhaps these naval exercises, defense exercises increasing? And I also want to bring up the topic of economy, trade. If you compare US's trade with China and if you compare US's trade with India, it's nothing as compared to what it is with
really
China.
So fraction of
more needs to be done, do you think, on that front as well?
Surely, but I've always held that trade is never an indicator of relationship. If that was the state, look at the Japan-China trade, look at India's trade with China and Pakistan's trade with China. Trade is never an indicator of relationship, although in a globalized context, it should grow when there are no hurdles. And Indian trade itself has grown with the United States, from 2006 onwards, today it's grown 4 times.
Right.
And an important area of trade is defense trade, although it is still a small proportion of the US trade, because they really trade in defense. But from Indian perspective, see the number of things that have been lined up, the helicopters, the howitzers, the Apaches, all these are going to form, already I think it's $5 billion which is lined up. Already they have concluded $8 billion, plus now the agreement on exercises. So I would say the defense trade itself is growing, and the relationship is growing in the context of improved relations. I mean, the graph on economic terms is tremendously a steep high.
Right, because there is still so much potential. Now, before we move on to our next story, I would like to bring out this very important point, which also links us to the next story that we'll be talking about. The mentioning of terror, the bringing up of Pakistan in the talks between Manmohan Singh and Barack Obama. What, did it send out a strong message to Pakistan?
Yes, it did. And, there was a stage when the terror had 2 different angles. United States had its own definition of terror when it was dealing in Afghanistan. Now they are on the verge of withdrawal, and they never saw cross-border terror as terror. From that point of time, terrorism was their terrorism and Kashmir was not terrorism. If it is an indicator that they are accepting that, this is the terrorism and this is part of the global terror, I think it's a big leap forward.
All right. Professor Pandey, hold on to that thought. Now, apart from meeting the US President, another important meeting for the Prime Minister is the one with Pakistan. Take a look.
Prime Minister Manmohan Singh and Pakistani Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif met on Sunday in New York on the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly and agreed on the need to reduce tensions in the disputed Kashmir region. The two leaders spoke for about an hour at a New York hotel in their first face-to-face meeting since Sharif swept to power in Pakistan's May elections.
My understanding is that both sides wish to see a better India-Pakistan relationship than we have today.
Prime Minister Pakistan emphasized that resolution of all issues, including Jammu and Kashmir, Siachen, Sir Creek.
Prime Minister Manmohan Singh and his Pakistani counterpart Nawaz Sharif agreed to work to restore a cross-border ceasefire after a spate of shootings in order to improve strained ties. India emerged from the meeting of more than an hour, calling the talks useful, while Pakistan called the atmosphere very positive. The two prime ministers agreed to instruct military officials to work together to develop a mechanism to stop ceasefire violations. The two leaders accepted invitations to visit each other's countries, but no dates were set.
All right, Professor Pande, another very, very important meeting at the United Nations. How do you see this step, considering the fact there's been so much opposition back home, the attack that's taken place in Jammu? Do you think talking itself is a very big positive sign?
I'm not a very big proponent of talks, as I would say. Talks for the sake of talks don't mean anything, especially at a time like this. Plus, Nawaz Sharif's historical record with India has not been very good, because when he started talks, you know what happened. Other than that, you know, inside Pakistan, Nawaz Sharif faces very, very serious challenges. You know, the attack on the church, which was in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, Peshawar, which took place.
Right.
And then in Balochistan, the great tragedy that has taken. Even otherwise, Karachi, anywhere you see, his challenges are immense inside Pakistan. So he has started this issue of talks. If you look a little back, just the elections which he has just fought, he fought with the help of those terror groups, his own constituency, his own province. So I say his track record on counter-terror is not very clean or very good. And so therefore, you know, while there is nothing wrong in talking, but there should be a purpose in talking. Look at China, Japan, they don't talk, the recent thing. Look at Putin, he cancelled the talks. So if you want to make a point across, you know, I think not talking sends a greater signal than just talking without any purpose.
All right, point taken. What is the future of the two nations then? Can they ever go beyond terror? You had, you know, some sort of trade barriers being lifted, but that too came to a standstill after what we saw in January with the incident at the line of control. How do you see these nations progressing forward, considering the fact that India will be having elections next year, Pakistan has a new government in place?
Well, you know, terror issue has to be tackled. Otherwise, there are issues which are purely technical in nature. I would say largely technical, in the Siachen issue, the Sir Creek issue, or even the water disputes, you know, but they all get overshadowed by this terror, because you are just losing lives. Even more than terror, the, you know, LOC, ceasefire was in place, and the murders which took place of our soldiers. So, you know, there are some issues which are, you know, the red lines, beyond which negotiations will not take place. If they deal with the terror issues, there are issues which can be tackled. I would say trade, they have themselves gone back on MFN, which has, which in itself doesn't mean anything, but is extremely symbolic, and we have very minimal trade with Pakistan. But general relationship can improve if something can happen on this killing through trade or violation of ceasefire, through terrorism or through violation of ceasefire.
So something can be achieved, but we'll try and figure out both these nations as to how to come to a common understanding. Of course, they're very complicated history among the two nations. Thank you so much, Professor Pandey, for joining me on World Panorama and sharing your thoughts on those two top stories. We're taking a short break. On the other side, some big moves have been made at the United Nations General Assembly. A report on Syria and Iran is coming up next, and a lot more. Stay with us. You're watching World Panorama. The US and Iran held their highest level talks in over 30 years, in which Tehran put possibilities on the table to resolve the long-standing dispute over its nuclear program, even as Washington sounded a cautious note. Meanwhile, on Syria, ending weeks of diplomatic deadlock, the United States and Russia reached an agreement on Thursday on a draft UN Security Council resolution aimed at ridding Syria of its chemical weapons arsenal. The United States and the other permanent members of the UN Security Council were pleased by a new tone and attitude from Iran in talks aimed at resolving the impasse over its nuclear program, and set a new round of negotiations for next month.
We've agreed to try to continue a process that will try to make concrete and find a way to answer the questions that people have about Iran's nuclear program. Needless to say, one meeting and a change in tone, which was welcome, doesn't answer those questions yet, and there's a lot of work to be done.
Iran continued to make overtures of appeasement in New York, when recently elected President Hassan Rouhani sent a clear message of moderation and diplomacy.
دریافت کرده‌ام متعهد به انجام وظیفه در چارچوب اعتدال هستم که از جمله مستلزم برقراری تعادل بین واقع بینی و آرمان‌های جمهوری اسلامی ایران است.
Meanwhile, in a major diplomatic breakthrough, the US and Russia have agreed on a draft United Nations Security Council resolution on destroying Syria's chemical weapons, breaking a 2.5-year deadlock over the vexed issue.
I was pleased to have a meeting with Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, and we did reach agreement with respect to the resolution. We're now doing the final work on pulling that language together.
A major sticking point between Russia and Western powers was whether the resolution would be under Chapter 7 of the UN Charter, which covers the Council's authority to enforce its decisions with measures such as sanctions or military force. And German Chancellor Angela Merkel emerged the clear winner of Sunday's election after her conservative political bloc surged to its best result in 20 years. Merkel may have won an impressive third general election, but she now faces a delicate and lengthy task in forming a new government as party leaders met to map out their next steps.
Liebe Freunde, der Jubel zeigt, wir können uns heute alle freuen. Das ist ein super Ergebnis. Ich möchte als erstes den Wählerinnen und Wählern danken, die der Union ein so überragendes Vertrauen gegeben haben. Und ich darf den Wählerinnen und Wählern versprechen, wir werden damit verantwortungsvoll und sorgsam umgehen.
Angela Merkel, the only major European leader to be re-elected twice since the financial crisis of 2008, winning a strong popular endorsement for her mix of austerity and solidarity in managing the troubled Eurozone. The preliminary final results of the German federal elections as released by the Federal Returning Office was 41.5% for the Merkel's conservative bloc of CDU-CSU, 25.7% for the Social Democrats, 8.6% for the Left Party and 8.4% for the Greens, while the Free Democrats with 4.8% and the Alternative for Germany with 4.7% did not make the cut for the German Bundestag. Despite the resounding victory, Merkel's third term won't be a cakewalk. Having not won an absolute majority, Merkel's CDU-CSU bloc may be forced into talks with Steinberg's SPD, which Merkel worked alongside between 2005 and 2009.
Well, certainly for Germany, this is something very significant and very new. The Liberal Democrats are not going to be in the next parliament, which changes fundamentally coalition dynamics and also the discussions that will be happening in parliaments.
Under her leadership, Eurozone countries which embraced reforms were rescued. But Merkel resisted moves to turn the European Union into a transfer union in which German money flowed south. At the same time, the German economy delivered the lowest unemployment for 2 decades. And yet she finds herself in a difficult position.
Well, the death toll in the devastating earthquake that struck Pakistan's Balochistan province rose to over 500 on Friday as more bodies were pulled out of collapsed homes by rescue teams who faced attacks from nationalist militants. More than 1 lakh were made homeless by Tuesday's 7.7 magnitude quake that spent a second night in the open or under makeshift shelters as response teams struggled to reach the remote region in southwestern province of Balochistan.
From Karachi to North India, a trail of destruction. The 7.8 magnitude earthquake that struck Balochistan on Tuesday has left hundreds of people dead. Rescue workers fear many bodies are trapped under the debris of collapsed mud houses in southwestern Pakistan.
There are over 400 injured that we are aware of as of today.
The epicenter of the tremors felt in Karachi, Hyderabad, Larkana and parts of northern India was 69 kilometers from Awaran. The earthquake at 4:29 p.m. Pakistan time lasted for a minute, causing widespread panic. Rescuers struggled to help thousands of people left injured and homeless. The Pakistani army came to the rescue with relief trucks and medical convoys. The army deployed helicopters and hundreds of soldiers.
12 जो ट्रक्स सामान खाने पीने की अशिया और दीगर चीज़ें वो क्वेटा से रवाना कर दी गई हैं. जो 16 घंटे 17 घंटे का फासला है तो वो आज पहुंच जाएंगे और अभी 7 ट्रक और मज़ीद यहाँ से भिजवा दिए गए PDMA की तरफ से खाने पीने की अशिया जो है आवारान के लिए। इस वक्त हमने 2 मेडिकल सेंटर कायम कर दिए हैं, एक है उत्तल में और एक हब में।
We have moved a number of medical teams to the area. There are 3 army units that have been moved, including one the Frontier Corps unit. We have moved a number of search and rescue teams to the area to look for the injured and also those people who are trapped in the rubble.
The force of the earthquake created a small island off the southern coast in the Arabian Sea. Pakistan's Geo TV broadcast the pictures of the landmass that geologists said are sometimes created by the movement of gases locked in the earth under the sea, pushing mud to the surface in something akin to a mud volcano.
This island that has appeared, it's appeared 5 kilometers off the coast of Pakistan, primarily in Gawadar area. It's not an extraordinary, it's an extraordinary in the sense that it doesn't happen very often.
Balochistan is Pakistan's largest province but also the least populated and most impoverished. The main concern is to clear debris and provide medical facilities to the affected areas.
Much else has been unfolding around the world. Here's a quick wrap of other international news of the week.
The UN Chemical Weapons Investigation Team returned to Damascus, Syria on Wednesday to complete the probe on chemical attacks. It will gather evidence from an alleged chemical weapon attack on March 19th against the town of Khan al-Assal in Syria's northern province of Aleppo, which was captured by the opposition in July. Meanwhile, in an interview aired on Venezuelan state television, Syrian President Bashar al-Assad said he doesn't rule out a US strike. Assisted by the FBI, Scotland Yard and spy agencies of Israel and Germany, Kenya has begun probe into invasion of a Nairobi mall that left at least 67 people dead, including 5 of the assailants. Somali Islamist group Al-Shabaab had said it had carried out the attack in retaliation for Kenyan army operations in Somalia. The militants stormed the Westgate Centre on Saturday, throwing grenades and firing indiscriminately at shoppers and staff. Palestinian workers clashed with Israeli police in Jerusalem's Old City on Wednesday as Jewish visitors tried to enter a compound sacred to both Jews and Muslims. Israeli police escorted Jewish visitors to the compound known to Muslims as the Noble Sanctuary in Jerusalem's ancient walled city, sparking outrage from Palestinian worshippers. Greek public sector workers went on strike for the second time in a week on September 24th, shutting down schools and leaving hospitals with skeleton staff. From municipal police to teachers, workers began a 42-hour strike against plans to cut thousands of public sector jobs. Public anger has been fueled by the killing of an anti-racism rapper by a supporter of the far-right Golden Dawn Party. Pakistan's education activist and crusader Malala Yousafzai was awarded one of this year's prestigious Clinton Global Citizens Awards during a special ceremony in New York. She received this year's Leadership in Civil Society Award. The 16-year-old, who was shot by the Taliban last year for attending school, has co-founded the Malala Fund to continue advocating for universal access to education.
Time now for all the very latest news from the world of movies, music and lifestyle. Here's our entertainment wrap. Final arguments in the nearly 5-month Michael Jackson wrongful death trial began Tuesday in a downtown Los Angeles courtroom. His mother Catherine is suing AEG Life for allegedly negligently hiring Dr. Conrad Murray and failing to properly supervise him in the months before the pop icon's June 2009 death. Taylor Swift made a surprise appearance on the red carpet this week, bringing major star power to the premiere of the latest take on the classic love story, Romeo and Juliet. The singer-songwriter, who's said to be good friends with the film star Hailee Steinfeld, posed for photographs before heading inside the ArcLight Theatre for the screening. Romeo and Juliet opens in the US on the 11th of October. Clutching their recently won Emmy Award, stars Jeff Daniels and Bobby Cannavale were among those who arrived at the HBO after-party in a celebratory mood in Los Angeles. The premium cable network dominated the primetime Emmys, taking home 27 awards in total for series including Veep, The Newsroom and Boardwalk Empire. Besides Liberace movie Behind the Candelabra, Best Actor in a mini-series for Michael Douglas as Liberace in Behind the Candelabra, and Bobby Cannavale, winner of the Best Supporting Actor award for HBO's Boardwalk Empire. That's all we have for you in this edition of World Panorama. See you next week, same time, with more international news. Till then, you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Let's close today's show on a high. Yes, it's time for Oktoberfest in Germany. The 2-week beer festival kicked off as hundreds marched through the center of Munich in barbarian costumes each year. The party attracts some 6 million visitors from around the globe. This is me, Sana Khan, signing off.